What you're looking at here is just a section of the reading. It reviews the ABCs of behavior that we looked at last time in part 1. So the antecedent of a particular behavior, in other words, the setting, what comes before it. So as this first example here, the walk sign at a crosswalk, right, is a stimulus, is the setting that enables the behavior of walking across the street safely, right? So you know when you see that's the walk sign that then you can walk across the street. The consequence then is that you'll arrive safely across the street, right? So there's the ABC in that example. And you can see here there are various examples as well that you've already looked at in your reading. So you get a request for a password, you type in the password, the consequence is you gain access to whatever website you were interested in. Now, our focus in this section is going to be how we work with consequences, and that's one of the big differences between classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Classical conditioning really focuses more on the association, like the mental connection that we form between a stimulus and another stimulus, essentially. So two things. One of those two things, though, has to be important. It has to be important enough that it gets our attention, that it creates a memorable situation for us, and that would be the unconditional stimulus, right? Classical conditioning is really about those associations and those connections and how those connections then might influence our behavior. Operant conditioning or instrumental conditioning is a little more intentional in that it's about trying to control behavior by either changing the setting, the antecedent, or by changing the consequence, like by using rewards and punishments. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at, is how we can use operant conditioning intentionally in that way. To highlight the difference here between classical conditioning and operant conditioning, there's this short section from your reading about how Thorndike and Skinner really focused on what happens after the behavior. And again, that's the consequence, right? They called those consequent stimuli because they are produced by or occur as a consequence of the behavior. The behavior brings them about. And so that's where the term consequences come from. We are really talking about rewards and or punishments. And so operant conditioning tries to change a behavior by either changing the antecedent, right, the setting that it occurs in, or by changing the consequence of that behavior by using either a reward or a punishment. So there are two things to keep in mind when using rewards. One is that we'll see is that it's important to be immediate, and the other one is that it's important to be flexible. And then we'll also look at the issue of, do rewards always work, or are there some limits to their effectiveness? So in terms of how to work with consequences like rewards and punishments, again, being immediate is really important. You have to, in a sense, catch the behavior as it's occurring and deliver the reward or the punishment right away. The effect of consequences diminishes really quickly if they're delivered very slowly. Like dog training, you want to have treats ready in your pocket or in your hand even. And then when you're training your dog to sit or to do any other thing like that, you want to be able to give them the treat right away. You can't wait 10 minutes because it will not allow a connection to be made between the dog sitting and then getting the treat. And just like it's true in dog training, it's true for all of us at all different times. Another example is the criminal justice system. Very rarely is anyone caught in the act of committing a crime and arrested immediately. And that diminishes how effective law enforcement can be in terms of regulating behavior. These are important issues to keep in mind, that the immediate use of rewards and punishments is really important. And we'll talk about some ways to kind of cope with situations where it's really hard to give an immediate, like right on the spot reward or punishment. The other thing to keep in mind is that different things are pleasant and unpleasant or aversive to different people, right? We all have different things that we like. You then must be flexible in doing that. And so this is a good time for us to talk a little bit about an issue that's brought up in your reading as well, and that is that there are different kinds of reinforcers. I don't make a big deal out of this, but it is something that Skinner in particular talked about. And he distinguished between primary reinforcers and secondary reinforcers. Primary reinforcers are just things like food and water, essentially, something that physically affects us. So it's something that naturally feels good and is rewarding. So if you're thirsty, water. If you're hungry, food. If you're cold, putting on a warm jacket can also be a primary reinforcer, for example. Secondary reinforcers are things that have gained value to us because of our experience with them. They're not naturally anything. So think of money, right? An actual $100 bill doesn't do anything, and it's no nicer to touch or to smell or to feel or anything than a $1 bill. And yet we all know we'd rather have a $100 bill than a $1 bill. So money is a secondary reinforcer, right? It's an item that has some benefit to us, that provides a benefit to us, and that we like, that we want, but only because we've learned about what it can get us, right, in our life. So we've learned through our life experience that we want money, but we never had to really learn to want warmth when we're cold or to want to eat when we're hungry. Those things are primary reinforcers. Same thing with, like, a smile, praise, feeling a sense of pride in yourself. Those are all secondary reinforcers that we've learned to appreciate in our lifetimes. So the second issue that we're going to be dealing with is, do rewards work? And if we just think about, like, why do you enjoy your hobbies? Why do you enjoy eating out, for example? Or why do you enjoy bicycling or anything that you really enjoy doing, or going out to a movie? It's obvious that there are things that we are motivated to do. And so in a sense, what that means is that we find these things rewarding, right? We can think about what that even means and how these things motivate us. Rewards, if they are meaningful to the person, if it's something that they find motivating, that they are interested in, well, those are going to be effective then in increasing the consequence of some behavior. So I might be really motivated to study some new statistics that I'm trying to learn if I make it so that I will only go on a bike ride after I've spent 2 hours studying statistics. So we can use these hobbies, we can use these things that we enjoy doing as a way to motivate us. So let's take a look at some possible effects of rewards, and notice how I've separated our list into, here on the left, ones that I put a smiley face on. These are all going to be the positive effects of a reward over here. And on the right, with the sad face, these are all going to be sort of the negative effects of rewards. So let's look at the positive first. Rewards can increase a behavior quickly and easily. So they have that ability to very quickly and easily increase the likelihood that say, a student does their homework, or that a student studies for the vocabulary test. So they can very quickly and easily kind of motivate that. Rewards can also make something just more fun because there's this fun reward connected to it at the end. So when a classroom of students is excited about having a party on Friday afternoon, if they're able to have a really good set of spelling test scores during the week, then that can kind of make studying for the spelling test that much more fun for the kids, right? Rewards can also get a student to try something that they otherwise would not really even consider. So maybe a student doesn't think that they enjoy reading, for example, and that's normally not something that they would really even consider doing in their free time. But if there's a fun reward connected to reading a book, then that might get them to try reading that something that they otherwise would not really have wanted to, because, oh, if I read this book, then we're going to be able to all act out the characters in this play at the end of the week. So a reward like that can make something that a student wouldn't normally really try into something that they would kind of attempt to do then. Also, if there's a big enough reward, it can get them to try to do something that seems really hard and difficult that they normally would kind of not really be motivated to do. So these are all, positive things of rewards, that they can really get people motivated to do something that otherwise they wouldn't really try to do. Now, on the right here, of course, we have the sad face with the negative outcomes. And on the negative side is that a reward can decrease a person's intrinsic motivation. And so let's think about what we mean by intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation would be the motivation to go to work because you're going to get paid, right? It's the money. It has nothing to do with the job that you're doing at all. It's this extra thing. So an extrinsic motivation is because there's something extra that comes with what you're doing. Intrinsic motivation comes from your natural enjoyment of what you're doing. If you volunteer somewhere and you're not being paid, but you love doing it, you might be intrinsically motivated to do that. So even though there's no money connected to it or any other tangible reward, you still love it because you enjoy doing that naturally. That would be an example of intrinsic motivation. So when we see that rewards can decrease a person's intrinsic motivation, oh my gosh, that's kind of scary, right? So this is a serious concern. So I want to take a moment and look at how this was done. And so there have been several different studies that have been done in a variety of different ways, but the general format is kind of the same. They'll take a group of kids and they'll divide them up into 3 different groups. For example, one group gets to draw, another group gets to play with blocks, and a third group maybe gets to do nothing. Then after doing this, they get to play either with blocks, or they get to draw, or they get to do nothing. They have a choice then. What happens if you rewarded kids for the first thing that they did? If a child is rewarded for drawing, do they want to draw more or less at the second part of the study when they're given their choice of what to do if they were rewarded? Versus a kid who was not rewarded for studying but was just allowed to do it as much as they wanted without any extrinsic reward. So what some of the research has shown is if there was a reward given for drawing first, those kids choose drawing as their preferred activity less often later on, and they're more likely to choose something different like doing nothing or playing with blocks than a kid who was not rewarded for drawing. So there's something that can happen that's kind of a negative outcome here. If you want to reward a behavior in the hopes that a child will learn to enjoy it, it can have sort of the opposite effect by making them sort of not enjoy it as much, or at least not want to do it as much. So these are some of the possible negative consequences here. And so this decline in intrinsic motivation with reward is kind of concerning. Another thing is that rewards can encourage just sort of fast, sloppy work, unfortunately, just to get the reward. And so it's important then if you are going to use reward, that there be a standard for quality and not just checking off that a student has done something. And the other thing is that rewards can also decrease creativity. And so that's kind of also something that can raise some concerns, right? We don't want to decrease creativity. We don't want to discourage people from being creative at work or at school. And unfortunately, that's something that happens with rewards. When individuals are rewarded for finding a solution to something, it turns out that they propose fewer different types of solutions than, say, individuals that are just encouraged to provide a solution to a problem. They end up actually being more creative in their thinking. So because of these 3 issues here, there are some substantial concerns for the use of rewards and punishment.